Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. The outbreaks of anti-Semitism on college campuses since the Hamas attack on Israel has been shocking to many members of the public. There have been prominent examples of big donors saying that they are pulling funding and not giving another dime to some of these institutions until they clean up their acts. On Friday, Cornell University canceled classes after a student was arrested for making anti-Semitic threats. And Kim, one interesting response this week comes from a group of very large, prominent law firms who have sent a letter to law deans at universities. And here is a piece of this. It says, there's no room for anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, or any other form of violence, hatred, or bigotry on your campuses, in our workplaces, or our communities. As employers who recruit from each of your law schools, we look to you to ensure your students who hope to join our firms after graduation are prepared to be an active part of our workforce communities that have zero tolerance policies. And Kim, I think that that is a fascinating example because there have been many complaints about the radicalism of what is happening on college campuses in recent years. But it may take something like this that actually is putting some kind of funding or employment opportunities for graduates, something more concrete, putting something hard on the line before some of those faculty and administrators take the kinds of actions that might be needed.
Amen to this letter. It was such a good thing to see because we are in this unfortunate situation where the supposed so-called adults on universities, whether that be the administration or the professors in charge, not only are no longer teaching tolerance and teaching good behavior to the students of their school, but they're overlooking really outrageous acts of anti-Semitism and other hateful activity, sort of shuffling it aside as free expression when that is not in any way what it is. We can have civil debate on campuses, but discrimination and harassment and threats against Jews are something else entirely. And when those administrators do not hold the students at their campuses to any sort of standards or account, all it does is create an even bigger free-for-all. And we're seeing that now explode across campuses in the United States. So it looks as though it's going to take some outsiders, the people who actually matter, the people who recruit, the people who are going to be the future employers, to explain that such behavior is in fact not acceptable. And that in this day and age of modern media where we can see people's actions and they're happily posting them with their videos and their obnoxious statements online, that this is going to be on your record, and that if you come in for a job, there's going to be a second thought before you are just automatically recruited, given what that could mean for a workplace environment. It's been very good to see this has been signed by employees at 24 major firms, including some real titans like Sullivan and Cromwell and Davis and Polk. As of Thursday afternoon, it had more than 60 signatories and counting. And you know what I would love to see is some more of this in other places. This was obviously directed at law schools and the deans of U.S. law schools. But let's see corporate America stand up and do something similar and let those kids that are in other programs know that there are certain standards of behavior and that those behaviors are going to be expected of them, whether they're in college or whether they're working in the workforce.
There also have been some specific examples of law firms rescinding employment opportunities. For example, one of them involved an NYU student who wrote in a bulletin to the Student Bar Association, "I will not condemn Palestinian resistance." This was shortly after the terrorism on October 7th. And Kate, one of the things that I think is interesting about this question is it's possible that in some of these institutions, the administrators, the people who are putatively in charge, are not as far left or as radical as some of the faculty members are. And so I think, again, these kinds of outside pressure campaigns can change the incentives for those people, because for years, I think the incentives have been to put up with the radicalism because those are the people who are closest at hand and can make life the most difficult and the most miserable for the administrators on campus. And now we're putting something else in the balance here. The other question that I think comes to mind is whether this will also help change or could help change at these institutions the way that some of those faculty are recruited, the way that some of those students are recruited, and whether some of these institutions stop weighing student activism as heavily among the applicants as they seem to have been doing in recent years.
Yes, I mean, as awful as these campus episodes have been, it's so jarring that perhaps it is a beginning of a course correction on some of this radical chic behavior on campus and a wake-up call where employers and Americans are starting to notice what these schools have been marinating young adults in for so long now, that these vogue progressive causes are often very dangerous, and that this was really a revealing, unmasked moment here. And so many of these episodes that we've seen on campus are really jarring to watch. I do think in a couple ways, on the point about the administrators, I mean, one thing that these professional schools do really care about is where they place their students. And in the case of law schools, what firms they go to, what clerkships they get. So that has to factor into their analysis and is different than undergrad in some regard. I do think that hopefully we'll see more of this from medical schools would be another place where it could be really influential, where we've seen a lot of progressive dominance in these institutions. These professional schools are supposed to be turning out adults who are, in addition to being free from vile hatred, be able to conduct themselves in a professional manner as adults. And some of these videos on campus of harassing people and other things like that suggest that maybe that isn't as top a priority as it should be. So I do think the letter is good news because it is sending a signal to these schools about something that these schools care about, which is placing their students in elite jobs and elite clerkships, things like that. It also may change, hopefully, the type of student that these schools are aiming to recruit. I mean, I don't want to overpromise here. I think, unfortunately, some of these events will be forgotten all too soon and more of the same may happen. But I do think it is a moment to see this awful resurgence of anti-Semitism on campus. I think some of these donors who have stopped donating to schools, you have some professional blowback. This seems like a marker to me in ways that some of the other campus follies really hasn't been. And so hopefully will result in some introspection on these schools' parts and perhaps even on the students' parts.
Thank you, Kate and Kim. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back next week with another edition of Potomac Watch.